Greetings programs, and welcome to a brief update video where I've got two little pieces of news. One is that the new PC is now up and running. I'll put some pictures up in the background and I'll put the specs up. I cannot remember offhand. I'm not really a techie person. I know enough to put it all together, but even so, there were a couple of hiccups along the way. Although the biggest one was actually getting Windows to activate. I had to reinstall, was it twice? I can't remember, or was it like 2 drive wipes and having to... No, it was 2 installs and there was a bunch of having to wipe drives in between as well. Anyway, it just wouldn't activate the first time and the Microsoft help pages were no use whatsoever. And then I just tried a random thing and that worked. So, the thumbs up there, Microsoft. Anyway, but apart from that snag and one or two other minor snags, that all went relatively smoothly. It only took about 2 days to get everything together and start installing software, and then it's just been adding the little bits and pieces that I remember ever since. But I'm more or less properly set up at this point. Now there is one kind of big-ish change from my point of view with my workflow, which is down to the fact that I was using an Intel processor. I'm now using an AMD processor. And Intel processors these days have a kind of built-in... they've got an onboard graphics capability that AMD processors don't, is my understanding. I'm not a technical person. I don't really understand these things. I just know that I was able to use part of the hardware of my chip to do direct kind of encoding through OBS and not use the main processor threads for it. That's not possible anymore, but it's a much beefier processor compared to what I had before. So I can now encode directly with the processor, or I've still got the option of encoding through my graphics card. But I've been doing some testing with the various options, and it looks like I'm going to be doing processor encoding because the graphics card... I want to do 60 FPS now, because encoding a 60 FPS video, say a 15-minute video, something like that, with a 2-pass process through Vegas, that rendering time is less than a 30 FPS single pass was previously. That's how much improved it is. So it's pretty nice. But yeah, I've just had to sit down and do a whole bunch of rendering tests basically. Firstly, to figure out, where the capabilities were and how long things were going to test, but then to try and figure out what looked best going through Vegas in terms of the final product on YouTube. Because, of course, you've still got YouTube's mangling of things to deal with at the end, but I'm reasonably happy with the result, and I can now get... I mean, I could already do 60 FPS World Tanks videos. I'm aiming to do 50 FPS Warships videos because it's still not quite consistent enough frame rates for 60 FPS in Warships when I'm recording. But I think that's down to my GPU and also the fact that I think World of Tanks now is a lot more optimized in its client than Warships is. And hell, let's not even mention World of Warplanes. World of Warplanes is completely horrible by comparison. So things will look a bit smoother on the channel, I'm hoping, both because of the higher frame rates and also the fact if you do higher frame rate videos, YouTube gives you more bitrate to play with, or they're not as harsh with their encoding as they are with 30 FPS videos. So things should look a bit nicer as an end result, and it's that was the end goal, is both me getting better results and also much faster render times. So yeah, and as a side benefit, I'm going to be able to play some games better as well, or I'm going to get better performance out of them. Like KSP, for instance, where it uses the processor to track all the different little physics objects going on. So yeah, it really is quite a nice upgrade, and this was money well spent. And it's all thanks to everybody that's been, watching and not blocking ads, and of course the people supporting me on Patreon. It was all more or less directly funded without me having to go and hold out my cap and ask for more money. So that was always my goal, that this would be something I would do without like just through what I'm doing already, without me having to ask for something extra somehow. So the second piece of news is I am once again a Warships community contributor, but only for Warships. I've only reapplied for Warships and been accepted. Tanks, I briefly considered reapplying for tanks as well at the same time, because of course once upon a time I was a community contributor for both, but I really just decided against it, because just my experience with World of Tanks the last, I don't know, let's call it the last 2 years, particularly with some of the premiums that have come out and the lack of attention that the studio has paid to community feedback, and the amount of time it takes for sometimes rebalances to come in. Although I will say with something like the V4, for instance, we're getting they're making tweaks and changes within relatively short order, but it's kind of like that's a whole separate issue, you know, the V4, but it's like the core concept of that thing is kind of like a bit iffy, just in the same way that the core concept of a lot of the Japanese heavy tanks is kind of iffy. There's a reason they weren't in the game for a long time, and then, you know, they did an about face and suddenly there they were, and they were every bit as annoying and horrible to deal with as everyone thought they probably would be. Anyway, so yes, it is just for Warships. It's not like Leicester is saintly and perfect by any means, but with all the changes that they've made to the contributor program, and just the fact I've always been happier dealing with the Warships devs than the tanks devs. You know, just to give you a completely anecdotal point of evidence, when I quit the program, obviously the community team were, you know, there was everything going on with Foch at that point. And so the community team were, I hope, a bit sorry to see me go. I don't know. But I actually got an email from somebody at Leicester, one of the devs, saying, "We are sorry to see you go," on top of, you know, anything that the community team might have said at the time. So, yeah, I never got that kind of anything from the Misc studios. So, yeah, I don't know. You know, read into that what you will. But it's a slightly odd position, because it's still wargaming as the parent either way, and the kind of the marketing and the pricing and things like putting things in bundles, you know, that's all coming from the top rather than the development studios. So when I disagree with things like that, I'm still disagreeing with wargaming either way. But I don't know, I've always been much happier about the approach that Leicester has taken and how they listen to things, even if they don't get things right. I mean, we all remember the Graf Zeppelin, for example, those of us that were paying attention to that. And the Asashio's a much more recent example of the studio not really listening to what the community was saying, and it's a bit of a weird little ship, that, anyway. So, yeah, they're not perfect by any means, but I'm way more happy to be associated with Warships than I am with tanks as a community contributor. So there we go, that's my news. Some people are going to, I don't know, unsubscribe in disgust regardless. But yeah, just after seeing what they did with the program, speaking to other community contributors who have been in while all this has been happening, and even one or two that are relatively new, yeah, I'm happy to be that bit closer to wargaming again. But I mean, as ever, it's not going to hold me back from saying when I think they're doing things wrong. That has always been the case, regardless of whether I was a community contributor or not. So anyway, that's about it for now. If you have any comments or feedback, you can of course put them down below under the video. You can use the thumbs up or the thumbs down as appropriate, and as always, stay tuned for more.